So today our topic is on calculation, but it's a little bit different. In calculation, we'll look for the silent moves, or as they say, the silent killer moves, right? They are very interesting. They are very easy to miss as well, and they can be very effective. So yes, it's quite moves, but in calculation, right? So whenever we are told to calculate, the first moves we look for is something forcing energetic moves, right? But we tend to miss somewhere in between of our calculation or even at the beginning, those quiet moves, which if are included, we can win the game easily, or it makes our calculation more accurate. Okay, so this is first position, and here it's black to play. So how should black continue here? What should be the idea? So right now, the position of king looks bit odd, right? The king is kind of trapped, and we should try to look for some mating ideas, right? Black should go start with h6, right, first. So forcing black's king in the corner. Now the king is still mated. Now our task is to look for ways how we can try to checkmate white's king, right? So what can black do in this position? So if we ask the right question, then it's very easy to find the idea. Let's say the king is trapped on h5, right? What are the ways we can try to checkmate the king? One is to bring the knight to f6, but this takes a lot of time and white can always defend the square, right? Another way to mate white's king is to go for g6 and mate. But the problem always with g6 is that h6 pawn remains hanging in all those lines. So our task is to defend the h6 pawn, and we can do it only in one way, which is by bringing the king to h7, right? But we cannot do it immediately. King g8, he can take the knight. So then it's simple. Our task is to move the knight, and we can see in this position, knight does not have these squares available, right? White can always take. There is only one square where the knight can go and it cannot be captured. So this is the brilliant move. It's the quiet move, which helps black to go for this mating idea. And in fact, there is no way for white to prevent it without losing material. So let's say in case if white goes for bishop f4, king g8, bishop h6, how should black continue? Here you don't need to take the piece because if you capture on h6, king h6, and now look at your knight, right? It's inside corridor, it's worst place, and you cannot bring your king quickly. Here white manages to get counterplay. He'll try to push his pawns. But instead of taking on h6, we have this idea. So what's the point of knight f7, right? We are attacking the bishop. Now if he gives the piece, the king on h5 is not well placed. And if we compare this position with the position of king g8, knight h8, this is much better, right? Here your pieces are well placed in this position. Let's say if he does not take, if he goes back with the bishop, then again we have the same idea. King h7 followed by g6 and it's mate. So, okay, this was not played in the game. Let's have a look at the game here. White goes for g4 in the game. Black continues with his plan. g5. How should black continue? Knight f7 will win the bishop, but here we have a stronger idea. What can we do? Now, g6, if you win the bishop here, you're losing those pawns. Let's say if you take king f6 and king e6. White has too many pawns here. He has connected pass pawns, and d4 pawn will also push further. So this is good for white. Here, king h7 is the idea, threatening mate, right? White is forced to take on h6. He does not have many options. And now what should black do? Here, black has a choice, right? Should black go for g6 or should he start with knight f7? Which one is stronger? Whenever you are deciding between two candidate moves, always try to go further 2, 3 moves and then evaluate the position, right? And compare between them, which one looks better from the starting position. Knight f7. This is the idea. Knight f7, you are threatening g6 mate, trapping the king, as well as taking on d6. If you start first with g6, then the king activates, right? White's king gets to e6. He gets this pawn, and there is some counterplay. Although even here, I think black should be able to win, but you have to calculate the line, right? Till then. So it's not required. You don't need to go for these lines. But there is no need to calculate all this. Knight f7 is easier. Now you're threatening mate, which forces him to take on g7, knight d6. Okay, this was played in the game, in fact. G8 queen, king g8, king g6. And what's the idea in this position? What can black do? Black has a strong idea. So white side is clear. He wants to go king f6, king e6. How can we try to stop this? One way is to go knight e8. There is another interesting idea, knight e4. This is a nice way to stop the king's idea to f6, as well as black is planning to take the pawns, right? Knight d2 or knight c3. These are the weak pawns. So knight e4 is nice idea here. White cannot take on e4 because now black wins easily. White is not in time to create his pass pawn. And he does not take in the game. In fact, he goes for e5, trying to create active play. But this does not work. Knight c3. Here, the key idea was to understand what was the problem in opponent's position. Once you figure this out, then it's very easy. Like in this position, it was the king placement on g5. The king was trapped. So immediately you should get this idea that there has to be some mating ideas, right? If the king is not placed well. And h6 is very typical. Once the king is still mated, king has no moves, then we should look for ideas how we can try to checkmate the king. And by looking at this, we got to this idea, right? King g8, king h7, followed by g6. So knight h8 is nice idea. Also, one of the things in calculation is you should try to look for backward moves as well, right? Generally, we try to go forward whenever, let's say, we are attacking opponent's king. But we should also look for moves like this, knight h8. It's interesting here. Okay, so let's have a look at next position. Okay, so this is the next position, and here it's black to play. How should black continue? What should be the idea here? Here, the most natural move, which I can see many of you suggesting, is queen e1, right? Queen e1, queen h2. These are, of course, most natural moves since we are attacking the king. We have queen knight, and we have been taught, right? Queen and knight can mate the king. But here, in fact, in this position, it's not easy to mate because white has his knight in defense. It controls some important squares, right? And only queen and knight won't be sufficient for us to mate here. So we should try to look for ideas, right? Try to find candidate moves. What can we do? Generally, you should play on the side where you are stronger, right? Or where you are attacking. Right now, it's king side. So try to look for moves on king side in general, right? Not on the other side of the board. So what can we do? Let's say we know that queen and knight are not enough, which means we need to include one more attacker. Now we cannot include our bishop. King as well cannot be included, which means that we should try to include our pawns, right? We already have h5 pawn, but we cannot go h4, right? h4, king into g4. So what can we do here? Let's say if you go for knight e3, the king will run king f3 and go away, right? You don't want this to happen. So black has a nice idea. Exactly. Black has this nice idea, f5, including the pawn in attack. We have one more attacker now. We need to c8 check, king h7. And now, in fact, we are threatening mate. h4, king f3, queen f1, and it's mate. White has a few ways to try to stop this. Queen d8 is the main move here, which was played in the game. But before that, let's have a look. What if white goes for knight g1, trying to sacrifice his knight? So here it's important. How should black continue? What should be the idea here? we have two options, right? Two main options. Let's say we can take queen g1 immediately, or we can start with h4 check. So what do you think? Which one is good among these? Only one works well. h4. This is very important, including the attacker, which is this pawn, right? In the game, starting with h4 first. If we start with queen g1 first, then we give white time to bring his queen in defense, and he can go queen e8. Queen e8 has multiple ideas. First is to stop black's threats with queen e3 and queen e1. And another important idea of queen e8 is he wants to go for queen h5 and perpetual checks ideas, right? So this is the reason why queen g1 does not work well. If h4, the king runs away and the king is running. Yes. So this does not work, right? We have to start first with h4, forcing white's king to f3, and then take on g1, threatening mate. Now, white has no time to bring his queen in defense. He must run away with the king. That's the only option. King e2. Now, here queen e8 does not work. Queen e8, queen f2 mate. So the king has to run away. King must go to e2. This was played in the game. How should black continue? I think here black has multiple ways to win the game. Yes, both queen e3 and queen g2 wins. In queen e3, you will get back your piece and continue the attack. So this is one way. Or you can even take on g2 and try to queen the pawn. King d3, h3, and push your pawn. Takes. Okay, not h2 because queen f5 check, but queen f3 and then h2. And there is no way to stop the queen. So this is winning for black. Yes. Okay, in the game, white did not go for knight g1, right? Knight g1, we managed to create a pass pawn. Instead, he prevents the ideas of h4. Okay, here, what do you think? How should black continue in this position? What's the idea now? Queen e1 check, that's the idea. Forcing white's king to h3. Because if we start with direct knight e3, then the king runs, right? And white has two extra pieces. So we have to start first with queen e1, forcing white's king to h3. And now we can go for knight e3. So now we are threatening mate, queen h1, queen g2. And the only way white can try to stop, no, he cannot go king f3. King f3, we have queen f2 mate. So he's forced to go to h3. Now knight e3, threatening mate. Okay, there are two ways to stop the idea with queen h1. White can either go for knight g3, controlling the h1 square, or king h2, preventing queen h1 ideas, right? Now let's have a look at both of these options. What if king h2 first? Yes, we should include third attacker, right? Which is the pawn on h5. Yes, h4. h4, the idea is that it controls g3 square. And on the next move, we are threatening knight g4. So let's say if queen g5, knight g4. And white's king no longer escapes, right? The third attacker defends, controls the g3 square. So white is forced to give his queen, but this is winning. It's queen against three pieces. But again, position of king is most important factor in such positions. White's king is weak and black has these pawns. So again, he will create mating threats. And this is winning for black. Okay. So in case of king h2, we have the idea of h4, right? Controlling the escape route of opponent's king. But what if he goes knight g3? Now, controlling the h1 square. What can we do? We have two options, right? Always we should look for drawback of opponent's last move, right? Idea and drawback. That is one of the typical ideas. Knight g3, the knight on e2 was controlling some important squares like g1, right? So now it's no longer defended. The c3 knight is hanging and the king is trapped, right? The king cannot run now. So this is the drawback of knight g3. Although he prevents, but he also traps his own king. And black has two ideas in this position. Black can either go for queen f2 or queen g1, threatening mate. In case of queen f2, you again give white some time to bring his pieces. So he can go bishop f1. And now we cannot create many threats, right? Everything looks well defended here. Queen f4, queen h4, and he manages to bring his queen in defense. So for this reason, queen g1 is much better. So what's the difference, right? Queen g1 as well, he can go bishop f1. How should black continue? Knight g4, this is the idea, threatening mate. King h2, he's forced to go for this. Queen h2 check, of course. We should try to force white's king further. And now what should black do after king g5? Should he take on g3 or does he have something better? Here the idea is that now the king wants to again escape, right? King f5, and the king wants to run, but we can stop it. Remember about the first position we saw, where we had seen the idea of knight h8, right? And then taking the king. Similarly here, the king on g5 is not well placed, and we have this idea of knight h6, threatening queen g3 mate, mating ideas, as well as knight f7. The queen on d8 is badly placed here. This does not give white time to take on f5. Remember in the first position over here after king h7, queen d8 is the only move to defend. He cannot go queen e7 or something else. And we cannot imagine, right, at the beginning. This queen on d8 is the reason why white loses the game. But from the continuation, we can see clearly. This is the reason why white loses the game. Knight h6. This was played in the game and white resigns. There is no way to stop both these threats. Queen g3 and knight f7. Knight f5, knight f7. Yes, it's a mate. Yes, exactly. So this is a nice example. Here it's regarding quiet moves. Quiet moves can also be including more attackers in the game, right? Whenever you are attacking opponent's king. In the previous example, we included the king, king g8, king h7. In this example, it was including h1 in the attack, right? By going for f5. So this was the idea. Okay. So let's have a look at next position. Uh, so this is next position, and here it's black to play. How should black continue? Remember about today's topic, right? What's the idea here? Again, white's position of king looks weak. What can we do? Rook b4, the problem would be e4. And now e into f5 is with check. So our rook needs to stay on the fourth rank. If knight h4, he can bring his rook in defense. Or he can go for rook g7, right? There is no need of this. Rook g7 is easier and it's mate. So what can black do? What are the candidate moves instead? Now, some of you suggested rook e3, but again, the problem with rook e3, the drawback is that rook is a motif, right? Rook and knight. So white has this nice idea, rook g7, deflecting the knight and then takes on e3. So this does not work as well, right? So what are the other candidate moves we have? We need to bring the rook in order to mate, right? But both rook b4 and rook e3 does not work. What's the problem in both cases? It's the position of king. In rook b4, we cannot go back because of check. In rook e3, it's again check. So what can we do in the first position? There is a simpler idea. The move you suggested is also fine, Cardozo. Knight h4 is another interesting idea. It's possible. But here it allows rook g7, right? So what can we do? All the three moves which we saw, right? Rook e3, rook b4, knight h4. In all of them, rook g7 and the king on g6 is the problem. So why not move the king? Exactly. Rook e3, very important idea. You need to first stop the escape route. Remember about the previous example, right? Stopping the escape route first, forcing white's king towards king side, and then going for mating ideas. That's the idea. Followed by rook f3 next, right? And black is going to mate. Let's say if rook g7, for example, takes king g4, f5, and it's mate. Rook f4 or rook e4. And there is no way white can stop this, right? King h6 is not a forcing move. It gives white time to do what he wants, but he still cannot stop the ideas. On the next move, black is threatening knight h4 and g5, right? All these ideas. So black is winning here. Yes, this is the idea. Quiet move, but creating many threats, right? So this is another nice example. Uh, this is game of Carlson against Nepo from the invitational online event, right? Rapid event. In the game, he took king f5. This was the game. Rook e3. He goes for rook c5, but it does not help. G6. We can take on f3 as well. That's another idea. And rook ff3, followed by f5. And Nepo won the game here. Rook e4, f5, rook e4. It's mate. Of course, in shorter time control, it's very easy, right? To miss such moves like king h6. So you should be always alert about such ideas, right? You should be sharp, not to miss anything. But let's say once you spot this, right? All these three moves, the reason is rook g7, which means that the problem is with our position of king and we must do something about it. And then we reach this king h6 candidate moves. So that's the idea here. So let's move on to the next position now. All right, this is next position. And here again, it's black to play. So what do you think should be the idea in this position? What should black do? Rook c3 looks the most natural, threatening to win the piece. This was played in the game, a6. Now, in case of king g2, rook g4, and anyway, we win the piece, right? So the only thing white can do is try to create his own counterplay. And he goes for this, a6 in the game. Okay, now what do you think should be the idea for black? What if king g3, bishop e5? And anyway, white loses the piece. King g2, rook g4. He cannot defend it. He has to go for a6. Okay, now what's the idea for black here? Always, whenever you are placing your pieces, you should try to place them on squares where they don't restrict each other, right? But black has a stronger idea instead. What can black do? Look for candidate moves. So black has two options, right? First is he can try to stop the pawn. And second option is he can allow white to push his pawn, but create mating threats against white's king. So which one do you think is more effective here? So let's say you have to take the piece, right? Okay, king g2. And now it's very important. How should black continue? You need, if you want to try to mate the king, you will need all the pieces, right? Here, rook and bishop must be included in the attack. Rook bf4, bringing the rook in the game, threatening rook f2 ideas. If he defends the f2 pawn, we are bringing the bishop as well. So in the game, he goes for a7, rook f2. Now, white has two options. He can go either to first rank or he can go to the third rank, right? The king on third rank generally looks very risky in such positions since it's very easy to get mated, right? For example, rook f3, and we can include the pawn h5, bishop f6, it's mate. So the most obvious ones are king g1 and king h1 in this position. Now, what if king h1? What should be black's idea here? You have to bring the bishop, but first you can start with rook h4, forcing white's king on the square. This is also a typical idea, right? Whenever you have a dark square bishop, try to force opponent's pieces on the squares so that they can be attacked easily. And bishop d4. Now you might say he has queen, right? But look at the pieces. All these three pieces are very far away from the king, and it's not easy to bring them. So this is winning for black. What if first bishop d4? Instead of rook h4, if you start with bishop d4, then he can queen, and he has this idea, queen d8, controlling the h4 square. This is the reason why first we need to start with rook h4. That's much better. You don't allow queen d8. So rook h4 first. That is why move order is very important. Whenever you are calculating lines, you need to be careful with move orders. A8 queen. And now there is no way, right? Black side is clear. Rook anywhere on the second rank, followed by rook h1 mate. If white goes for rook a4, again, the idea is same. Rook b2. Try to take two rooks. And we know that two rooks against queen, it's winning in such positions where the pawns are isolated. In general, it's winning if opponent does not have any counter play against your king. And black will simply take those two pawns, attack it and take it. So this is winning. There was a question after rook b f4, what if rook a2? If rook a2, bishop d4. That's the idea, followed by rook f2. And here you can always sacrifice the bishop as well, right? Yes. Okay, let's see how the game went. Rook b f4, a2. So he goes for king g1 in the game, not king h1. And now what should we do? Bringing your last piece in the attack, bishop d4. Yes, that's the idea. 8 queen, king g7. Again, you have some similar ideas, right? Again, you want to move the rook and threaten mate on h4. Rook anywhere on the second rank, followed by rook h4 mate. And the only way white can stop this is to attack the bishop on d4, which he does in the game. So he goes for rook a4, trying to get the bishop. Okay, what should black do in this position? Yes, I think rook b2 is another option we have. It's winning as well. In the game, he tries to go for mating ideas. Yes, he goes for rook f1. Rook f1, rook f2. Again, forcing white's king further on third rank. And now he takes on v1. It's very interesting because now the king is on third rank, right? It's a rank cutoff here, second rank cutoff. Next, black threatens to take and it's third rank cutoff. The king is forced to go further. Yes. And here it's mate. King g4, h5. Okay, white tries to run. Rook f2. Yes, finally including the pawns in the attack. And it's mate. Yes. This is a nice example, right? How black won the game. But the typical idea here is that whenever opponent has a pass pawn, right, and it's about to queen, there are two ways. First thing is you can try to stop the pass pawn with your bishop or rooks. And if you cannot stop the pass pawn, then try to create threats against opponent's king. Try to look for ways how we can quickly bring our pieces and conduct an attack. Yes, Adarsh. So you are saying this is hard to calculate, right? Everything. But let's say if you see till here, right? Rook bf4 and bishop d4. I think this is enough. Next move bishop d4. Anyway, the line is kind of forcing, right? White does not have many options here. It's not so difficult. Yes. The main thing is to evaluate this position, right? In any case, I think here we have three attackers. White has no defenders. And this is the reason why white is losing here. Now, here queen d8 won't work. Queen d8, you can simply go rook b2, take the rook. This is one way. I think it's the easiest one. And then continue the attack. Rook f2, rook g1, rook h1. It's mate. So that's the idea here in this position. Rook g4, rook f5. Yes, yes, this is one way. You're right. But then he can go rook a2, right? Bring the rook via second rank. I think rook b2 is the easiest one. This is winning. Let's move on to next example. There is another one interesting position. Here it's white to play. What should white do? This is game of Carlson. Carlson against Aryantari. And the position before is also quite interesting, but this is the critical position for our today's topic. So how should white continue over here? Yes, so this looks natural, but in fact here he can take. Anyway, if queen h6 as well, it will transpose. And in this case, I think it's not a mate. Or let's say here at least Brack is surviving, right? He has a pawn and bishop for the exchange, and there is no mate. But we have a strong idea. Right now, after queen h6, king g8, the problem is that black's queen is so strong that it defends everything, right? And after knight f6, rook f6, he can bring the queen defends g6. So do we have some ideas here? Sacrificing the rook. This was played in the game. Rook e8, queen e8, queen h6. The king is forced to go to g8, queen g6. In case of bishop g7, both the bishop and the rook both are pinned. So in case of rook f6, you can take the queen and this is winning. In case of king h8, which was played in the game, what can white do? Bringing the last piece in the attack, knight f6. This was the game, knight f6 and black resigns.